Welcome to Elizabeth's Chronicles. If you love true crime, consider subscribing. Neil Entwistle was born on September 18, 1978, in England. He attended the University of York, and earned a master's degree in electronic engineering. His parents were Clifford and Yvonne Entwistle. He has one sibling, a younger brother, Russell. He grew up as working class. His mother was a cook, while his father was a coal miner. While at the University of York, Neil Entwistle met Rachel Souza, who was from America. Rachel was studying abroad. They married in August of 2003. The two moved to Worcestershire. Their daughter, Lillian, was born on April 9, 2005. Neil worked as an IT consultant, while Rachel worked as an English and drama teacher, at St. Augustine's Catholic High School in Redditch. The couple moved to the United States, where they stayed with Rachel's mother and stepfather, in Carver, Massachusetts briefly, until they finally found their own house, in Hopkinton, near Boston. In the evening on January 21, Rachel's friend contacted police to report her as missing. Authorities entered the residence but were unable to notice anything amiss. On January 22, 2006, a more thorough search was conducted, and the bodies of 27-year-old Rachel and 9-month-old Lillian were found in the bedroom of their home. The bodies were hidden under a pile of sheets and bedding. The couple had only been living at this rental home for 10 days. It was revealed through autopsy that Rachel died of a gunshot wound to the head, while Lillian died of a gunshot to the stomach. The shot that struck Lillian in the stomach passed through her body and also pierced Rachel's left breast. On January 23, a police officer called the parents of Entwistle, in England. The call lasted over 2 hours, and was recorded. Neil Entwistle told authorities that on the day of the murders, he left the home around 9 a.m. in the morning. He said when he left the home his wife and daughter were alive. He said when he came back home, around 11 a.m., he found them both dead, and didn't know who murdered them. He said he covered their bodies, then left. He said he was so upset after finding their bodies, that he decided he would kill himself. But he could not do it with a knife. So he went to Materazzo's house to get a .22 caliber gun, but that house was locked, so he decided to fly home to his parents' house in England. Police wasted no time in issuing an international arrest warrant. On February 8, 2006, Neil Entwistle was taken into custody at London Underground train at Royal Oak Station. At first he resisted extradition back to the US, but later he was cooperative and agreed. Only hours after the deaths, Neil had purchased a one-way ticket to London. By 8 a.m. Eastern Time, on January 21, he had boarded a flight on British Airways, and departed Boston. This raised suspicion with authorities. After investigating the crime scene, his DNA was found on the handgun used in the killings. The gun was owned by his father-in-law. He told police that he had only used that gun once, several months earlier, while practicing at Joseph Materazzo's shooting club. Forensic investigation of Entwistle's computer found that days before the murders, he was searching key terms, how to kill people and escort services. Further investigations revealed that Entwistle was lying about being employed. They discovered he had been unemployed since September of 2005, and was deeply in debt. He had been racking up credit card debt of more than $30,000, to give the illusion that he was still employed. He claimed he had an income of more than $10,000 a month from offshore accounts set up by his previous UK employer, but this was untrue. Entwistle was also using eBay for fraudulent transactions, and was currently being investigated by the company. Forensic evidence linked the .22 handgun owned by Joseph Materazzo to Neil Entwistle. Authorities believed he may have murdered his wife and daughter for financial gain. Entwistle's trial for the murder of his wife and daughter began on June 2, 2008. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The judge presiding over the trial made it clear that this sentence is a whole life sentence, which can only be overturned by governor pardon or successful appeal. The judge gave 2 life sentences on the murder charges, and 10 years of probation for the firearms charges, to run concurrently. Also that he could never profit from the sale of his story. Entwistle's conviction was appealed automatically to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. He hired a new lawyer since his original lawyer now had pancreatic cancer. In the appeal, Entwistle's lawyers argued that his family's home was illegally searched, without warrants, and that the evidence seized should have been inadmissible in the previous trial. However, his appeal was rejected, and the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear his case in January of 2013. He can no longer appeal. In 2008, Entwistle's parents filed harassment against their local newspaper, the Worksop Guardian, with the UK Press Complaints Commission. However, their complaint was rejected. Entwistle's parents insist their son is innocent. They claim that Rachel killed Lillian then herself. Rachel and Lillian were laid to rest at Evergreen Cemetery, in Kingston, Massachusetts, with the last name of Sousa on their headstone. They were buried in the same coffin. Lillian's birth and death certificates were changed to Father Unknown. Charles "Chuck" Stuart was born on December 18, 1959. By 1989 he was the general manager for Edward F. Cackers & Sons, on Newbury Street. He had been married to Carol for 4 years. She was a successful tax attorney. The couple were upper middle class, expecting their first child, a son. Carol was nearly 8 months pregnant. On October 23, in 1989, the couple were driving through Roxbury neighborhood, after attending childbirth classes at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Minutes after leaving the hospital, Stuart called the police on his cellular phone. Carol had been shot in the head, and Charles had been shot in the stomach. For 13 minutes, the Massachusetts State Police dispatcher, Gary McLaughlin, begged Stuart for a reference point to get emergency help to them as quickly as possible. He kept asking for a cross street, or anything to identify where the couple were injured at. Cruisers searched to find the lost Toyota Cressida, in Boston's Mission Hill neighborhood. Eventually officers found Charles and Carol. Stuart happened to have one of the very early models of cell phones. When he passed out, police were able to sound sirens from nearby patrol cars, while listening to an open microphone of his cell phone. They were near the intersection of St. Alphonsus and Harraden Way. Carol was slumped over, in the front seat of the car. Stuart was propped up by the headrest, on the driver's side of the car. EMTs removed both from the car. Just by chance, on the night of the crime, the CBS reality television series Rescue 911 was riding with Boston Emergency Medical Services personnel. The crew was able to capture footage of the Stewarts being removed from their bloody vehicle. Charles Stuart was transported to Boston City Hospital, where he underwent surgery. Carol was rushed to Brigham and Women's Hospital where she had just taken her childbirth classes, where doctors delivered her son through cesarean section, 2 months early. He was named Christopher, which was the name Carol had chosen prior to the fatal shooting. He was baptized in the intensive care unit. At 3 a.m., on October 24, 1989, Carol died. On October 28, over 800 people attended her funeral, which was held at St. James Church, in her hometown of Medford. At her funeral the Mayor Ray Flynn, Governor Michael Dukakis, and Cardinal Bernard Law were in attendance. Charles wrote a eulogy that he read aloud saying, "Good night, sweet wife, my love. God has called you to his hands. Not to take you away from me, or the happiness and gladness you brought me, but to bring you away from the cruelty, and the violence that fills this world." He said that for us to truly believe, we must know that his will was done and that there was some right in this meanest of acts. In our souls, we must forgive this sinner because he would too. My life will be more empty without you, as will the lives of your family and friends. You have brought joy and kindness to every life you've touched. Now you sleep away from me. I will never again know the feeling of your hand in mine, but I will always feel you. I miss you and I love you. Your husband, Chuck. Baby Christopher suffered trauma and oxygen deprivation during the shooting. He held on for 17 days after his birth, but subsequently his little body gave out, and he passed away. Stewart described the shooter to police. He said that he was black male, and had a raspy voice. That he was 6 feet tall, and around 30 years old. That he forced his way into their car, at a stoplight, and ordered him to drive to a nearby Mission Hill, where he robbed, then shot Carol in the head, and him in the stomach. Stewart said he rushed away, and called 911. Several hundred black men were questioned. Hundreds of officers stormed the Mission Hill, Roxbury, and Mattapan neighborhoods, searching for anyone even vaguely matching the description. Based on Stewart's description of the shooter, Boston police were on a manhunt for a heartless monster who could shoot a pregnant woman and her husband. Police quickly zeroed in on a few suspects. The first was a homeless black man. He was held for 3 weeks, until police focused on a new suspect. Based on the description of the killer, William "Willie" Bennett was identified as the attacker in a lineup on December 28. However, the case against Bennett fell apart on January 3, 1990, due to Stewart's brother, Matthew, coming forward and admitted to police that he had drove to meet his brother, Stewart, on the night of the murders. He said his brother told him it was to commit insurance fraud. However, once he arrived, Matthew said that Carol was shot, and his brother had shot himself, to make it appear as a carjacking. Stewart gave him the gun, Carol's wedding rings, and other valuables, and told him to get rid of them. Everything was inside a Gucci bag. Matthew took the bag, and threw it off the Pines River Bridge in Revere. Some items, such as the rings, were recovered later. He came forward when he discovered that another man was being charged with the crime he knew his brother committed. Local newspapers described the situation. The city's anger seems inexhaustible. That may be because it is impossible not to feel sullied by the Stewart case. Either one was duped by a fabrication with racist overtones, or one was impotent as police focused their investigation on a succession of innocent black men. Due to Stewart blaming a black man for the crime, this caused racial tension in Boston for quite some time. Boston police were using stop and frisk tactics on young African American men when they were searching for the killer. Some living in the area described it as living in a war zone. Once Matthew came forward with the information about his brother, sometime on January 4, 1990, merely hours after Matthew gave the information to the police, Stewart met with his lawyer and then abandoned his car on Tobin Bridge in Chelsea. He left a note in his car stating, he was beaten by the new accusations and was sapped of his strength. Stewart then jumped off the bridge, committing suicide. His body was located in the Mystic River the following day. Later it came out in investigations that Stewart had mentioned he wanted to kill his wife on numerous occasions. Several family members and friends came forward stating he told them he wanted her dead. He had approached various old friends, asking if they would kill his wife for him. It was also discovered that Stewart's other siblings knew what he had done prior to Matthew coming forward, but remained silent. It also came out through the investigation that Stuart was planning on a relationship with a woman named Deborah Allen, with whom he worked with. However, the two never even had their first date, and it appeared Deborah wasn't even interested in him. Matthew Stuart was charged with obstruction of justice and insurance fraud for assisting his brother in covering up the crime. One of Matthew's friends was also charged with accessory to murder. Matthew entered a guilty plea in 1992, and was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in prison. He served his time and was released on parole in 1997. However, he was later arrested again on drug trafficking, but was released when that case fell apart on appeal. In 2011, he was found dead in a homeless shelter in Cambridge from a drug overdose. Charles Stuart's motive was money. Immediately after being discharged from the hospital, he collected $100,000 from a life insurance policy. He paid cash for a brand new Nissan Maxima. It was speculated there was much larger insurance policies, but that hasn't been confirmed. He had mentioned to several friends and relatives that he did not want the burden of a child, and he didn't think his wife would be able to return to her high-paying law practice after she had the baby. A scholarship was established by Carol's family in her memory. The Carol D. Mighty Stuart Foundation. It provides scholarship aid to Mission Hill residents and Malden High School graduates who show leadership abilities. It is for students who would not be able to afford to go to college without assistance. The foundation goes far beyond just funding. It provides funding, mentors, and helps with summer internships. Ironically, one of the students awarded the scholarship is actually the daughter of the man who was falsely accused of murdering Carol Stuart and her unborn baby. The foundation has awarded over $1.5 million to over 220 students. Entwistle was a cold and calculating man who murdered his innocent wife and baby girl for financial gain. His fraudulent lifestyle was catching up with him, and he couldn't continue covering it up any longer. To him, murdering the two people who love him was the best option. He fled the country to avoid arrest, but in the end he was brought to justice. His parents blame their son's victim. It's not hard to see the apple doesn't rot far from the tree. With Charles Stuart, he didn't want a child, and feared his wife would not be able to continue bringing in her lucrative income. He decided a quick life insurance was more appealing to him. He shot his pregnant wife, and waited for her to stop breathing before giving the dispatcher the location. He was a cruel man who deserves the fate he received, death. That concludes this episode. Keep your eye out for episode 14, coming soon. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.